Hey, I'm Brant Manswar. I am the author of the new book, Black Sheep. The best advice I've ever been given. I have to go to Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better.
Woohoo! That's great advice, brother.
Thanks,
I love
pal.
that. That's
Thank
really,
you.
really good advice. And congrats on a fantastic book. I'm super excited that we get to talk about it today. I'm excited that you and I get to talk because,
No kidding.
yeah, man. I mean,
Been a minute.
it has. It's been quite a couple minutes since. It's interesting because I see you play music, I see you speak, and now I see you write this freaking incredible book, dude. So, and not to mention, you're a great husband and an awesome dad, and I think that's a great place to start, man, because your son Theo, right? That is, I would say that's kind of the center of the book in many ways, right? That's the key piece. So talk to us about Theo and how I think that helped you get your Black Sheep values clear.
Yeah. So in 2012, my oldest son, Theo, who at the time was 14 years old, was diagnosed with a rare blood cancer, and he needed a bone marrow transplant in order to survive. And so at the time, I was touring with Big Kettle Drum, and it took us off the road and sort of put us in the hospital with him when he was battling. And so it was 263 straight days, I think, in Florida Hospital for Children. And that sort of experience is what birthed this book. When he was in the hospital, he had the transplant. We found an unrelated donor, which was great. But after the transplant is when everything sort of went off the rails. And so he developed something called graft versus host disease, which every transplant recipient gets, but he had it at the highest level. It was killing him. So the way that they treat it is they super suppress your immune system so the body won't fight back. And so they did that. And when they super suppressed his immune system, he contracted a deadly fungus whose treatment was to super boost the immune system. And so it created this zero-sum game that culminated one afternoon with my wife and I being called into the parents' lounge, and them basically a row of doctors in there looking at us saying, "We are so sorry. There's nothing we can do. If we treat one, the other's going to take his life. We don't think he's going to make it through the night. And so you should probably, go say your goodbyes and call who you need to call." And so that moment is really the birth of this book, where when you're struck with something that you're not prepared to hear, what do? How do you know how to make a good decision in that moment? And I didn't. And so, emotions take over, and I grab my wife's hand. We walk back down the hall to his room. We grab his younger brother. We sit on the edge of the bed, and we do what the doctors told us to, which was to find the words to say goodbye. That was the worst decision I've ever made in my life.
Wow. Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, having to say goodbye and kind of giving up, if you will.
Sure.
That's brutal, man. That's tough. And I would say, Brent, I know you, man. That is not who you are. So what the hell happened, man? And how did that shift? How did the world shift? Because thankfully, that's not the end of the story.
No, it's not. What ended up happening was I sat on the edge of the bed and I had this really difficult conversation, and I just didn't. What do you say? You know what I mean? What do you say in that moment when you're told to say goodbye to your child? I mean, it's you don't want to do it. And so I stumbled and bumbled and had to sit there and have him go, "I'm going to miss you, Daddy." And you're just like, you're broken in that moment. And so I called my parents. I called my younger brother, who lives in New Hampshire, 1,500 miles away. And I'm like, "Listen, this sucks. I'm sorry, but he's not going to make it through the night," they say. "So if you're going to say your goodbyes, you don't have time to get here. You're going to have to do it over the phone." And so he did, and was incredibly distraught, as you could imagine. So he hung up the phone that night, and he just felt helpless. And so he ends up recording himself sitting on his couch that night, holding up poster boards that sort of talk about the scenario. My nephew's dying. Here's what he has. Here's what he's taking. We're running out of options. He's running out of time. He never said a word. He played the song "Fix You" from Coldplay from start to finish, and held up 55 poster boards over the course of the song, and uploaded it to YouTube as sort of this Hail Mary attempt to try to find a solution that we were told was an impossible scenario. And so he uploads it. We sat on the edge of that bed all night, sort of waiting for Theo to pass. He made it through the night. He's holding on, and my phone's ringing off the hook. I'm trying to be present. One of the things that I really have learned since that moment is the importance of being present. And so I'm trying to ignore everything and take every last second I can. And by the time I reach for my phone a couple hours later, it's physically hot from just vibrating all morning long. And so I pick it up and I look, and I have all these phone numbers and names from people that I don't recognize. And what I didn't know that my brother had made this video and uploaded it to YouTube. And what had happened was, by the time I reached for my phone, it had been seen over 500,000 times. And I'm getting these messages from people from all over the world. Some of them happen to be doctors. And so one of them was a doctor, Cody Ennis at MD Anderson in Houston, who happens to be a leading researcher in this fungus that was threatening his life. And he said, "Hey, there's this new sort of treatment that I'm not sure that your doctor's aware of. Would you mind if I had a conversation? I think it might help." And so we said, absolutely. And then, I get a call from Dr. Tim Johnson from Good Morning America, who says, "You tell your doctor, get me a list, anybody you want to speak to, and I'll try to make it happen in the next 24 hours. And so we made a list of a guy at Dana-Farber in Boston, Joseph Anton, Dr. Joseph Anton, who is a leading sort of doctor on graft versus host disease. And, also a researcher at Cornell University with the fungus. And we sort of these four doctors put their heads together, and they came up with this crazy plan to try to save Theo's life. And it worked. And so we went from say your goodbyes to having a path to move forward. And we were told that this was impossible, right? And so we end up with this fairy tale miracle. And we're all thrilled, of course. This is an amazing scenario. But what I will tell you is that, for as amazing as it was, from that moment for the next 4 or 5 years, every night before I went to bed, the last thought that went through my mind, as happy as I was I wonder if Theo thinks I gave up on him. Which I know that's not the case, but it is a legitimate question to ask. And that made me realize that I didn't know what mattered most to me. I had zero of my deeply held personal core values defined. And because of that, I was winging it in the moment. And I made a bunch of awful decisions, man, just awful, that were solely based on emotions in that moment. And if I could go back now, I know exactly the conversation I would have had, because it would have been filtered through these non-negotiable values that I have, and it would have framed everything differently. And I wouldn't have had to take years and years and years of beating myself up. And I could have made some better decisions in that moment. And that's really what this book is centered around.
Awesome. Yeah. Thankfully, Theo's still alive, still doing well, right? That's
22 years old. Yeah. Outside of this friggin' pandemic, he, finally had gone back to being in a classroom for the first time since the 8th grade earlier this year. And so, he's doing really well. We're very thankful. Still a journey. That's, people don't realize that survivorship can suck as well. And so it's one of those things that he's still got quite a bit of ways to go. He got a kidney transplant almost 2 years ago now, and is still sort of that in the process of his body adjusting. And so all in all, we are thrilled. But it's been a crazy 8 years. Let's say that.
No doubt, brother. No doubt. Wow. Well, you mentioned something there that I think is really instructive for folks out of that story, and that it's all about your values. You say that in the book, you say your black sheep are the deeply held core values that make you an original, which I think is really instructive there, right? They can't be altered, dyed, or changed, but we have to know what they are first. So we have to, you say, right? We just gotta find our purpose, right? That's all it's all about, right?
So it's I was 47 years old, bud, when somebody finally explained to me why black sheep weren't valued like the rest of the flock. And when I heard the real honest reason, it blew me away. Like, I'm like, how the hell am I 47 years old and I'm just finding out about this now? But the reason that farmers don't value black sheep is because a black sheep's wool cannot be dyed. So every black sheep is in effect 100% authentically original. It is what it is, right? And so we have demonized black sheep for hundreds of years, that you're an outcast, you don't fit in. The interesting part of when I did the research for the book was I found just as many people who felt like a black sheep that were the goth kids in high school, or the music they chose, or they moved away from family, or whatever life decision they made that sort of put them on the outside. I met just as many people who felt like a black sheep that were so successful in what they've done that it was their success that sort of separated them from the pack. They almost lapped everybody. And when that happens, you get viewed as a black sheep because you're so far in front of everybody else. And so when I sort of learned that, I said, gosh, I believe we all have a flock of 5 deeply held personal core values. These are the things that no matter how much someone wants to try to influence or change you, they simply won't be moved. The challenge is that most of us never take the time to discover what these are. We know what's important to us, which is a list of 30 plus things on a daily basis, but we don't know what our non-negotiables are. What are the things that we have to full stop when we experience them, right? And so that's what this book does. It try to helps you discover what are these black sheep values that you possess, because if you want to choose a purpose, and that's, I think, the thing that people mistake. You don't find purpose, you choose purpose. But if you want to choose a purpose that actually is actionable, then you have to align it with these black sheep values. It has to be born from the things that matter most, because you're going to look to have your purpose help you keep commitments in your life towards the goals that you set. And if you don't have those two things aligned, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle in the how, right? Which is how you're living it out.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's so interesting. I took your quiz this morning after reading the book a couple times, right, in preparation for it, because I want to see, like, what is this quiz? And this is so interesting to me. And I it took me about 20 minutes to go through it.
Yep.
And I find, right, love, service, communication, collaboration, and learning, which I think just totally really align. I mean, the love thing, not like romantic love, which I think a lot of people might hear, right, but love for others. Really important, right? And so none of that really surprised me. But what did surprise me is the fact that you said, hey, we have to put all of what we do through that. Like, you talked about our favorite movies that we always go to. So talk to me about why I should be ashamed that Showgirls is my favorite movie. No, it's not. I'm kidding.
Nothing to be ashamed about for that movie. I'll tell you right now. Top 3 for me. So what I have found is that one of the interesting ways to confirm, because here's the truth. So you took the assessment, you've got what you think your initial flock of 5 are. Here's what I know for a fact. I know that 2 or 3 of those that you put down are 100% authentically real. You can prove them. You can give me 20 stories from your past that illustrate why these are real. I also know that 2 or 3 of them are bullshit, and they are aspirational sheep. They're who you want to be, but they're not who you are. And so what happens after you sort of discover your initial 5 is you go through this 2-week period of proving that they're yours, right? That's the how do you prove that these are actually your sheep and that you're not caring for someone else's? And that is a constant challenge for people who have grown up maybe having to care for other people, whether it's siblings or parents or whatever it is. It's sort of in your DNA. And so we often are caring for other people's sheep, and that creates a significant challenge for us because it takes food off the table for our own. And so the idea of favorites is one of the ways that we continue to try to prove that these are our sheep. And so the reason that we have favorites is because our favorites connect our head and our heart. Right. And so when our head and our heart connect, it engages our limbic brain. Our limbic brain is where all of our emotional long-term memory is stored. It's why you remember song lyrics. It's why you remember quotes from movies. It's why you remember these things that sort of these experiences that live in your head connect with these feelings that are born in your heart, these values that are born from your heart. And so it's a really powerful experience. And so when you look at what your favorites are, you should see evidence of your flock. It's the reason that it is your favorite. And so when we look at movies, I often, so tell me this, Phil, what is one of your top 3 favorite movies of all time?
Real Genius with Val Kilmer. It's his second movie, right? So
man.
yeah, I wanted to go to Cal Poly. So yeah.
Oh man. Okay. So for those in the audience that have never seen Real Genius, which should be a crime, I would add. But for those that have never seen Real Genius, can you give us like a 30-second summary? What's the movie about?
Sure. So young genius Mitch goes off to college. He's 13, 14 years old, right? Prepubescent, total nerdy guy, kind of like I was as a kid, right? He goes off to school and he runs into his roommate, who's Chris Knight, that's played by Val Kilmer. And in short, Val Kilmer's rebelling against the system. He's decided that the professor that is funding his research is no longer worthy of his time or energy and attention because he's been competing with Kent, his guy, and eventually, right, they kind of rebel against him and really cause some havoc.
Okay. Is there a particular character in that movie that really resonates with you?
Sure. So I would say growing up, I would have said Mitch. But now I would have said Mitch, but now I'd say Chris.
Why is that for you?
Well, for me, right? So I think I'm pretty original. I don't like the system all that much. I mean, I went in the military and worked at really regimented jobs, and I realized that's why I didn't ever fit in.
Right.
Because I'm, like my orange shirt. Most guys are not rocking orange shirts. That's not their jam, and that definitely didn't play when I was in the Navy.
True, right? True. So here is some interesting things that I would look at. And this is the journey that we would go on if we were working together to try to prove that your flock is actually yours. So I have known you for a few years. I know that things like learning are incredibly important to you. It's evident in so many different areas of your life and what you've done over the last decade, at least, that those are things that I go, okay, I see that. But when I look at Real Genius, I see some things that aren't represented in your flock that I would guess actually should be in there. But we haven't sort of dove deep enough to discover which ones are real and which ones aren't for you. Now, when you pick a word like love, which a lot of people do, it's one of the most popular words that people pick. I will also tell you that it's also the number 1 word that goes away when you get to your actual 5. And that's because love is a monstrosity of a word and it means different things to different people. And when you have something that's that huge, it can be difficult to find evidence unless you describe it and define it in a very specific way that you can start to look for it. But when you start to describe a movie like Real Genius, there are some themes that pop out in there that I look at and I'm looking for them to exist in your flock. So I look at things like independence or perseverance, and I'm looking and I go, I don't really see it in necessarily in there. I would argue that communication and collaboration are under the same umbrella, that they're too similar to one another to be separate values. And so I would say that we need to do something that I call leveling up, which is, can we find a larger word that encompasses both communication and collaboration together? So that would be one of the challenges that we'd work on together. And then the other thing that I thought for sure, and maybe it's a 6th sheep, which is definitely possible, is authenticity. You happen to be one of the most authentic guys I know, period. And you make no bones about it. And it's beyond your monikers, right? We know you for the orange. We know you for your glasses. We know you, but what we really know you for is for saying it like it is. You don't try to sugarcoat things. You just sort of give it to us straight. You're known for that, not just with the clients that you work with to help them get to where they want to go to, but you're like that with your friends that know and love you, that you just tell it like it is, because you care enough to not bullshit anybody. I mean, that's just, at the end of the day, it's just the truth. And so when we start to look at these things and we really land on the ones that are real, we can see evidence in our lives over and over and over and over again. And that's what happens when somebody, it's sort of the next phase. So they take that assessment, they go, okay, I think I have a good idea of where I want to start. And those are breadcrumbs to the actual ones and that exist. And so in the 2 years that I've been doing this, and the thousands of people that I've done it with, I will tell you that not once in 2 years have I started with 5 with someone and they ended with the same 5 at the end of 5 weeks. And that's because they learn more about themselves, and they also start to define these things. What I get people to do is to define what they mean when they say the value they choose. And when they do that, it really either confirms by giving them proof that these things exist, or it rules them out because there's no evidence to be found at all. So we have to go in search of the ones that are appearing.
Wow. So you can't just do this in 20 minutes. That's what you're saying, Brant.
Yeah, well, you can, bud. You can. And here's, we laugh about it, but here's the truth. That is how most people approach this type of work. I found my 5. I'm ready to go. I'm done. And they never confirm it because it's tough, right? So when I do this, I do a 5-week program. It's a 5-week program. The first week, we talk about what you've selected and why. The second and third weeks, at the end of each night, before you go to bed, your job is to do a little bit of archaeology. You got to dig back through your day, and you got to look at your 5 that you have selected and show me proof that they actually organically appeared without you trying. And so at the end of a week, I promise you 2 or 3 of them get either leveled up to a larger word, or we shift words to another one that might have been in the box that was that you had above before you drag this value down to your flock. Or you're self-sabotaging. You're not allowing this thing to appear, and that's possible as well. And so we got to sort of take a look at that if that is something that is happening. But after 2 weeks, you get this really strong sensation of what's real and what's not. And here's where things get really interesting. And I know you've experienced this in the work that you've done, and even in your personal journey over the last decade or so. So a lot of the people that I find myself working with, if we were being 100% honest, many of them don't really like themselves all that much. And there's a myriad of reasons why they would tell you is the reasons why they don't like themselves all that much. This work reveals something that I think is incredible. And it's this. I know that if we did this work and you did just what you did, here are the 5, and you say that these are 5 and you claim them as yours, but you never prove that they're real. When you go to look for evidence, there is no evidence. And so they're not actually who you are. They're who you think you should be, or who somebody told you should be. And when that is what you're using as your barometer, my question is always this: how do you know the person that you don't like is actually you? And there's this there's this weight that just goes away when people realize that maybe the person they don't like is based in these values that don't exist. And the reason they don't like it is because there is no evidence. And so there's nothing to believe. And so our work is to find proof, because when you have proof, you don't need belief. And so that is really what this work is about. Can we prove that these are your black sheep values? And if we do, I promise you the evidence is everywhere in your life.
Wow. That's a great point here as we pivot. A couple more questions here, but our work is to find proof, right, of our values, of who we are and what we believe, and why, maybe even why we believe that. And one of the things that you talk about is not just the who, or not just the what and the why, but the who, right? Those people that we surround ourselves with that support that, right? Are they in the places that we need them to be? So talk more about the who and why that's so important as we find our black sheep values, Brant.
So there's a podcast that you are familiar with that I host with my buddy Jim Knight, one of my best buds, and it's called Thoughts That Rock. And you have graced us on the show. We were thrilled that you said yes. And one of the other guests that we had during our first season was a guy named Don Yeager. Don is the associate editor of Sports Illustrated, also an 11-time New York Times bestselling author. He lived with Walter Payton the last 2 months of his life. He was personally mentored by John Wooden for a decade. He is a force to be reckoned with. And he, during his episode, we asked, what's the best advice you've ever been given? And he talked about Coach Wooden. And it was about his inner circle. And he said, if you ever want to know the capacity for success, look at your inner circle, and it will never be greater than what your inner circle is capable of. And that really shook me when we sort of did that, because what Coach Wooden would have Don Yeager do every year is he'd make a list. Who are the 5 people you spend the most time with in your personal life? Who are the 5 people you spend the most time with in your professional life? And then he had this other column for sort of other, which would be like church or, organizations that you volunteer at, that sort of a thing. And who are those 5? And so you had 15 people and you had to pick your inner 5. Who is the 5? Who are the 5 that you're going to dedicate the most amount of time to in the next year? And it was a really difficult process, because sometimes those people are family members that don't make the cut, right? They don't make it into the 5. And it doesn't mean you cut them out of your life, but it means you adjust the amount of time that you dedicate to that relationship. And the real question that he had, that Coach Wooden had Don ask himself is, are they going where you're going? And if the answer is no, they can't be in your inner 5. They have to be headed in the same direction you're going. And that is a tough lesson to learn. And it's one that I know you have dealt with your clients. It's the whole, if you want different results, you've got to do something different, right? You can't keep doing the same thing over and over and expect different results. And that is sort of that sometimes the people who get you to where you are aren't the people to take you where you want to go. And that is the most difficult crossroads that entrepreneurs find themselves in, because sometimes these are people that are ride or die with you, man. But maybe you've outgrown their ability to take you to where you need to be. And so that is where this conversation takes place. So the who are you actually spending the most amount of time with? And if they're not heading in the same direction as you're heading, you're limiting the potential of your black sheep and what they can do for you.
Wow. That's such a powerful reminder and such a hard lesson for so many of us to learn, right? I mean, the ride or dies are like, I always said I would, but sometimes we're not going in that direction. Sometimes we need a rocket ship instead of a motorcycle, right?
It's exactly right. It's exactly right. It's a tough, it's for me, for the people that I know that have been successful entrepreneurs or leaders, it is the most difficult crossroads to be at, which is the recognizing that the people who got you to where you are not the people to take you to where you want to go. And that is an incredibly difficult time in a leader's life.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, as we kind of wrap this up with those ride or die folks, we got the who, we got the what, we got those values, and sometimes those hard truths. You talked about the importance of taking the time to actually do this. So how long, Brant, do you suggest people take on this? And what's that first step that they need to take along the journey to finding their black sheep values?
So the process that I walk people through is 5 weeks. Is that the be all end all? No. Could you do it in less time? I would say probably not. Is doing it over the course of 3 months, 6 months, 9 months more realistic? Yeah, because some of these things are deeply held things in your life that take some excavating. You got to go back to move forward, right? You got to Tarantino it a little bit. And so the idea here is the first thing you need to do is figure out what your black sheep values are. There's a bunch of different sort of things you can use out there in the world to test that out. I happen to have an assessment built at findyourblacksheep.com, which is the book's website. as you said, it can take about 20 minutes. For some people, it can take an hour, because if you have so many things in your life that are important, the process of separating things that are important from non-negotiables can take a minute, right? And so once you sort of figure out what you think your flock is, it's going to take a couple of weeks to find proof that they actually exist. After you find proof that these are real, then you can flip the script and you start programming them into your day, choosing when and where they appear for maximum impact. So you take chance away. You take this luck, and I hope that by accident, there's this perfect timing of something that happens where this will manifest itself. No, you're going to speak it into existence. You're going to look at your calendar, and I'm going to go, okay, I know I had this interview with Phil today. I know my black sheep are creativity, hope, impact, empathy, family, authenticity. Which of these black sheep have to show up in this interview for maximum impact? And I write them into my calendar so that I'm not leaving it up to chance. I am actually speaking them into existence by deliberate intention. And that is how you change what's possible.
Wow. That's a great place to start. I'd also suggest people get a copy of Brant's book. It's almost out. It's really good. You can get it at findyourblacksheep.com. The assessment is there as well.
Yep.
Like I said, it took me about 20, 30 minutes this morning to do after I read through the book a second time, but it is worth it. And then spend some time, grind on it. See if there's really proof there. Prove those out, make the time, and get to know this guy. Brant is fantastic. His podcast is fun. Even though I've been on it, I still listen to it. It's awesome. Thoughts That Rock with Brant and Jim is one of my favorite shows of all time, because they're rockers that have a message, and it's really fun, much like this book about your black sheep values. So Brant, thanks, brother, for spending some time with me. I so appreciate you.
Thanks, bud.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Have an awesome day.